Welcome to Settling is Bullshit, a sweary podcast about claiming your joy. If you are an adult human craving healthier boundaries, a greater sense of purpose, or an increased capacity to feel at ease in your own skin, then you are in the right place, my friend. I'm your host, Kate Blauk, and I'm here to offer you practical tools and playful encouragement to help you step forward and be your most awesome self. My hope is that each episode will leave you feeling a bit more empowered to make brave choices and claim your joy. In today's episode number 2, we are going to talk about comparison. Dun dun dun. Specifically, comparison is the thief of joy, which is one of my favorite sayings and felt very apropos for this second episode in a podcast that is fundamentally about joy. We're here to talk about joy in our lives and claiming it for ourselves because, unfortunately, we live in a society that does not center joy. We're told that joy isn't something that we should necessarily take seriously. It seems frivolous. It seems unnecessary. Everything can feel so heavy. So how can we possibly be thinking about joy? And that's a sneaky form of comparison when you think about it. There's all this messaging in the world that, these terrible things are happening and there's so much injustice and inequity and shitty shit going on. So how could we possibly be thinking about joy? And that's fundamentally a shitty comparison. Just because terrible things are going on doesn't mean that joy isn't worth it. I really like the book by Cindy Spiegel, Micro Joys, where she talks about finding joy in the midst of grief. And to me, that's really what wholehearted living is all about, is recognizing that in this world, we are going to have a full spectrum of emotions. And that's important. It's really important to let ourselves feel sorrow. So when we're talking about joy, we're also going to be talking about sorrow. We're going to be talking about anger. We're going to be talking about feeling all of the feelings, all of them, even when we don't want to. But the premise that we're working with here is that joy is paramount. It's so important. We have to remember it. And to circle back to why we're here in this particular episode, now that I've given you one of my, what's sure to be many rants about joy, we're going to talk about how comparison is the thief of that. It steals it. It sucks it up and dries it out and robs us of our capacity to feel joyful when we are comparing ourselves and deciding that we come up short, which is what usually happens when we're comparing ourselves to people, places, and things. And that act of comparison, to build on the last episode that I recorded, comparison will often stifle creativity. It'll keep us from even getting started. When I was starting my blog, and now that I'm starting this podcast, it's so easy to get overwhelmed by the number of blogs and podcasts and authors and fancy people who are not me, who are doing so much better, and why should I even try? I can absolutely do that. That's an available option, and it's one that, for a little while I got a little stuck in. I got really clear with myself and my soul and my spirit and the universe that I wanted to do this podcast in September of 2023. It is now February of 2024, and I am finally recording episode number 2. Which, to be nice to myself is not a totally unreasonable turnaround time to making the decision and then getting started, right? There are phases of change. But a big piece of the spinning my wheels around it is that nagging sense of looking at what other people are doing and deciding that I am coming up short. And that's a decision that I can make for myself. That's a decision you can make for yourself. It doesn't feel like it, because the comparison monster and the not enough monster like to conspire and, fuck with my head. But really, what I want to play with today is the idea that when we are comparing, we have a choice. We can either look at those comparisons and seek out inspiration, or we can look at comparisons and find evidence of not enoughness. And that really is a choice that we are making. If I think about somebody that I really admire, so Brene Brown, for example, who has a podcast and who has, 6 books and 2 TED Talks and a billion gajillion adoring fans, I can look at that and say, who the fuck am I to start this podcast? What am I doing? Look at her. She's got it all figured out, even though she talks about not having it all figured out. And that's one of the things that I like about her. I can look at that and let it leave me feeling not enough. Or I can look at that and be like, oh my God, all praise Mama Brene. How cool would it be to just try to be 5 or 10% more like that? The truth is, I don't want to be Brene Brown. I don't actually want to be that famous. I mean, maybe quote me if I ever do get to be that famous. I don't know. I don't know what the fuck's going to happen with this podcast. We never know, right? All there is to do is to put it out there, is to try, is to see what happens. But in my life today, who I am today, who Kate is in this moment, I'm not trying to be Brene Brown. I'm trying to be a life coach. Actually, I'm being a life coach. That's a fact. I have clients. It's great. I'm trying to be an author. Oh, wait, I have a blog that has been going for 1.5 years and that I post to regularly and that people follow. Cool. Look at that. I'm already doing it. So if I take the pieces of someone that I admire, right? The willingness to be vulnerable, the willingness to talk like a normal person, and I take those as pieces of inspiration, then that comparison is helpful. And so that's an important question to be asking myself, right? Is this comparison that I am engaging in lifting me up or dragging me down? Is it leaving me feeling inspired and aspirational and like, oh man, I want to move towards that? Or is it leaving me feeling shitty and not enough and awful? And if it's in the latter category, then fuck that shit. Fuck that noise. I don't want it in my life. And I can say all this and I can speak about it and say oh, let's all just shake it off. And I know that it's not that easy. This has been something that's been up for me lately and that I've been working on in my sessions where I'm getting coached and doing a lot of journaling and reading a lot of books because I want big, cool things for myself. And in order to get there, I have to let go of trying to do it the way that somebody else is doing it because I'm a different person. I'm me and you're you. And both of us, all of us, have this really yummy, beautiful, unique combination of elements that make us us. And how one person does something oftentimes isn't really the path that I or you or we need to follow necessarily. And it's also important to remember all of the universal karmic kismet destiny factors that go into everything. I've been listening to an audiobook lately called The Psychology of Money, and he talks about how many things had to come together in this just sort of perfect combination of factors to make Bill Gates Bill Gates. Basically, at the time that Bill Gates was in high school, there were 300 million high school age humans on Earth. And let's say 3 million in the US. That number's wrong, whatever, but you can read the book. It's a good book if you want the actual numbers. I don't have the hard copy, so yet I ordered it. But basically, right, so there's 3 million in the US and 100,000 in Washington State and 5,000 in the Seattle area and 300 at Bill Gates High School. And Bill Gates High School was the only high school in all of the US to have a computer. So he was one of 300 out of 300 million who had access to the technology at the time and had the curiosity and the interest to fuck around and see what he could learn. And what taking that like really zoomed out view does for me is it takes so much pressure off. And it makes it so clear to me that whatever success is, whatever genius is, it all kind of stems from the universe conspiring. And that it's so out of our control. I mean, I think we all know that there's no one thing we can do to ensure our post goes viral on the internet, or one thing we can do that's going to ensure any kind of outcome in our lives. All we can do is suit up and show up and keep trying and trust that things are going to unfold in ways that we can't really predict and that they might just be amazing. One of the ideas that we're going to fuck around with on this podcast and that really informs the work I do and the things that I talk about is that belief shapes reality. And if we believe that things are going to be fucking terrible, they're probably going to be fucking terrible. And if we believe that they just might be amazing, they probably will be. That has been my experience. I got that idea from a therapist like 12 years ago, 14 years ago. I don't even know. Time doesn't make sense. But she invited me to think about like, what would shift if I just decided that things were going to be amazing? And keep in mind, like, amazing doesn't mean they feel good necessarily all the time. But when I look at life from this lens that it's gonna be amazing, that my life has been amazing, I can find evidence of that. And to try to keep us centered in this kind of comparison idea that we started with, what I've really been leaning into is this idea that the only comparison that matters, or that makes sense, or that is useful, is comparing who we are today to who we used to be. Probably because I've been diving into money stuff a lot lately, I've been thinking about my life like the stock market. I don't invest money. I don't actually know shit about the stock market, but I do know that the basic idea is that like it goes up and down, but if you invest your monies, because of compounding and whatever, that there's this upward trajectory over the long term. I know for me as a recovering addict and alcoholic and a human in a world that is full of distractions and instant gratification, it can be really hard for me to step back and let things unfold over time. I want them now. I want them already. But the cool thing about living in an information age and being a relatively creative human is that I have this big archive of my life, whether it's photos or journal entries or whatever. And it's a really useful comparison to dig back through that archive and look at who I used to be, how I used to be in the world, and where I am now. And even if I'm not in a place where I want to be yet, there's a lot of stuff that I want for myself, and there's a lot of stuff that still comes up for me. But if I look back at who I was 10 years ago or 20 years ago, there is a very clear upward trajectory, both in terms of my overall contentment with my life, my capacity to show up in relationships, my comfort in my own skin. You know, I'm 41 now, and if I think about who I was when I was 20, whoo, buddy, I am in a much better place. And that's a useful comparison. It's so easy to get bogged down when we're looking at where we are in this moment, and if we feel dissatisfied, when we're looking ahead to who and how we want to be, and feeling like, oh, fuck, I'm not there. What's wrong with me? Why am I not there yet? It can be really helpful to sort of turn backwards and be like, oh, except look how far I've come. And that can be true across all areas of my life, especially for me when I think about relationships. You know, I'm not currently partnered, which is not really how I want to be. However, my capacity to be in partnership, to be in relationship, to hold on to who and how I am instead of handing all of my agency and self-worth over to other people is exponentially better than it was 20 years ago. I used to date people because they liked me. I didn't like myself, and so I needed other people to like me so that I could like myself. And that's a real shitty place to be coming into a relationship from. And a lot of therapy and step work and personal development later, I'm really showing up in my life and in my relationships from a place of worth and value and knowing in my core that I'm lovable and I'm fucking awesome. I'm a delightful human, y'all, in case you hadn't picked up on that yet. And I really believe that today, not in a arrogant or egotistical way, but just in a sense of ease in my own skin that junior high school, 20-year-old, into late 20s version of Kate couldn't have believed possible. And that's just one of the ways that, like, things have been amazing. And to take it into more practical terms, thinking about creativity, if that's where you're at, it's where I'm at with this podcast and the blog. Just looking back like a year and a half ago when I started the blog, I had like 10 people who were reading it, partly because I only shared it with like 10 people because I was really nervous and insecure and it felt really vulnerable and big and scary and true and heartfelt. But once I shared it with 10 or so people and got some positive feedback, nobody was mean to me, then it felt possible to share it a little bit more and a little bit more and to then feel like I had my feet under me. And in just a year and a half, I've gone from 10 to around 100 subscribers to my blog. And that's really fucking cool. Now, if I take that number and compare it to Brene Brown, to bring it back to her, or any number of the other great podcasts that I listen to, I can choose to look at that number and be like, oh, fuck, that's not enough. How am I, just 100, blah. Which is super unhelpful. And like, I love every 100 people who are on that list, even the ones I don't know, because they're gifting me with their attention. That's the only resource that there is a limited supply of in this life, is attention. And so it's such a gift, and I don't take it lightly. I'm really trying to offer value in everything that I'm putting out there. And, you know, to do a different comparison that's useful and that gives me a sense of scale, if I had a party at my house with all 100 of those people, that'd be a big fucking party. That'd be great. I would be very overwhelmed, but also love to have that party. And if a year from now, I only have that 100 followers or subscribers, if this podcast only gets 100 downloads a month or 10 downloads a month, whatever, fuck that only. It means that people are still listening, people are still subscribing, I'm still offering value. Whatever everybody else is doing isn't relevant to what I'm doing right here, right now, with you. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. I hope that this was helpful to you. And if in a year I have 150 subscribers or 200, like, that'll be goddamn amazing. I can't wait to listen to this a year from now and see what has changed. Like, that's the fun thing about creating an archive, is actually going back to it and looking for evidence of awesome shit. If I want to go back through my archive and kind of look for evidence of those were the good old days, then in my life, I mean, I guess I could find that if I were looking for it. I've done a lot of cool stuff. I've been cool places. Cool things have happened. And so if I'm in a bad place and I go digging through that stuff, then I'll probably end up feeling melancholic and nostalgic. But if I go back through even the good times and look at it and celebrate that, and also celebrate how far I've come, then that gives me a sense of hope and a sense of momentum and a sense of I can do big, cool things. And I can become a more authentic, more heart-centered, more confident version of myself when I show up and absorb things that lift me up. I've really cut back on the forms of media that I consume. I really want to surround myself with authors and speakers and thinkers and relationships that lift me up. And that's my hope for this podcast, that this can be one of those resources for you. We are going to talk about trauma. We're going to talk about hard shit, but we're going to do it in a way that is intended and designed to lead us toward our joy. Another premise that will be coming in a lot is this idea that the universe, our role in this world, our curriculum, is to move from fear to love. This idea comes from A Course on Miracles, which I have not read. It's a whole thing. I read a Cliff Notes version, and I still don't totally get it. But I love this idea. It has been a useful framework for me that everything that's fucking going on in my life is an opportunity to choose fear or choose love, to move myself on the spectrum in my capacity to choose fear or choose love. Or rather, in my capacity to choose love, because I definitely want to choose that more than fear. Fear does not feel good. It's comfortable. I fall back into it. I'm human. Fear happens. But how I want to show up and how I want to live is in choosing love. And so if I bring that to my tendency to compare myself, the loving thing to do is to treat comparison as a source of inspiration, and to look back on who I used to be lovingly and say, oh, cool, look at how much I've grown. Look at how much I'm becoming the person I want to be. And look at how I am more and more able to center love in my life. And so my invitation as I wind down this second episode is for you to think about who you were 10 years ago. What has changed? How have you grown? How much more awesome are you in what areas of your life than you were 10 years ago? And especially if you're in a bad place right now, if you're in a rough spot, if you're feeling depressed, please, 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 look for the evidence of the good. Look for the evidence of the growth. Look for the evidence of what has changed that has been beneficial to you and to those around you and in your life. It can be really easy when we're in a bad place to go back and find evidence of, oh, I was so much thinner or more stylish or more blah, blah, blah at that time. And don't do that. That's not helpful. Look back and be like, oh my gosh, I have learned so much. I am so much more myself now. So I invite you to go back through your personal archive, whether it's journals, whether it's pictures, and give yourself a fucking gold star. I am a huge fan of gold stars. That will also come up a lot on this podcast. I am a big fan of glitter and gold stars and being proud of ourselves. So if you do go back and dig through that archive, and if for any reason it leaves you feeling funky or shitty, A, please call a friend and talk about it. Don't stay in it. And B, know that I know. I don't know who you are. I don't care. It doesn't really matter. I know that who you are today is a fuller, more vibrant, more self-aware version of yourself than who you were 10 years ago. It's just not, you cannot go through 10 years of life and not grow. It's just not a thing. Even folks who stay real stuck, there's a lot, you can't, things happen in 10 years. So I'm proud of you. You're doing great. I believe in you. And I want you to know that things are going to be amazing. Things have already been amazing. They're going to be amazing. And I'm so glad that you're on this journey with me. It's going to be awesome. We're going to have a lot of fun. And I absolutely believe you've got this. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please help me grow the podcast by subscribing, leaving a review, and sharing it with anyone you think would benefit from hearing it too. Your support means the world to me. If you'd like to get updates about new episodes, posts, and offerings, please visit settlingisbullshit.com to subscribe to my newsletter. You can also find information there about working with me one-on-one to build your most amazing life. Until next time, remember that I believe in you and that you are fucking awesome.